as always, we love it when you're a part of the conversation. The WhatsApp number to send your messages to is 0809 4440981. You can also tweet at smooth981. And we're streaming live as well on YouTube, so you can catch the live stream and post a comment underneath as well. Now, today is International Day of Happiness. The theme is be mindful, be grateful, be kind. And we hope that is the motivation going forward. Welcome, Mr. C, and welcome, Chibuzor.
Hi, Zibby. Welcome. Thank you. Good morning, Lagos. Good morning, Mr. C. Good morning, Zibby. Hope we're all in good health.
Yes, indeed.
Good morning, Zibby. Good morning, Chibuzor. Good morning, Lagos. Let's forge ahead.
All right, so we're starting off with a story that comes from Punch, and this is possibly the biggest story. Now, the Independent National Electoral Commission has declared Governor Makinde from Oyo, Babajide Sanwo-Olu from Lagos, Abiodun from Ogun, Mohammed Yahya from Gombe, Mai Malabuni Yobe, and AbdulRazaq from Kwara as winners of Saturday's governorship elections. Now, other winners include PDP's candidate, Pastor Umar Eno from Akwa Ibom State, and Dr. Diko Rada from Katsina as well. Now, here in Lagos, the governor was re-elected as he polled the highest number of votes in the elections held Saturday. The results were announced at an exclamation center. He was declared winner with 762,134 votes. Closest rival, Badebo Road's rival of the Labour Party, polled 312,329, and the candidate from the PDP, Olajide Adebmiran, also called Jandor, came third with 62,449 votes.
Okay, thank you, Zibby. And INEC on Saturday conducted what it purported or represented to the world at large as elections. Now, the results of that exercise have been declared by INEC, and we have some new governors and we have some governors that were re-elected. Now, for the governors that were re-elected, the Oyo State governor was re-elected, the Kwara State governor, the Ogun State governor, and the Yobe State governor, along with the Gombe and Lagos State governors, were re-elected. Then we have new governors in Akwa Ibom and some other states. Now, interestingly enough, the Akwa Ibom governor-elect was the one who regaled us with his plans for happy hour at Akwa Ibom. So people in Akwa Ibom, get ready for happy hour every Friday and all the best. Now, in Oyo State, it was a beautiful experience. There were no reports of violence, no reports of thuggery, no reports of bad behavior. The people came out to vote, albeit it was a low turnout, and seemingly or apparently the incumbent governor was re-elected, and there appears not to be any form of protest or disenchantment with the result declared. Now let's contrast that with what happened in Lagos. Lagos was truly shocking and saddening Saturday. Repeated scenes of violence, repeated scenes of thuggery. People openly saying that members of a particular ethnic group should not vote if they were not voting for a particular candidate. We had multiple instances of people attempting to snatch ballot boxes or scattering and destroying ballot papers. And there were a couple of videos where members of the Nigeria police force or men wearing uniforms of the Nigeria police force appeared to be supporting or protecting the electoral thugs. Now, in all of this, the turnout in Lagos was pretty low. In some places, again, INEC officials still got there late. Then the real shocker, in VGC, you bring out 10 polling units out onto the expressway when during the previous election, which was on the 25th of February, they were inside for safety. And to think that an INEC official appointed into that office and paid by the money of taxpayers could take such a decision unilaterally speaks to the weakness of our public institutions. Thankfully, common sense prevailed on Sunday, but again, it was an untidy process. In all of this, the governor has been declared re-elected with a margin that defies logic, that defies what really happened, what was perceived by the generality of Nigerians who participated in the election and those who watched online. Now INEC announces he got 762,000 votes in an election whose figures will turn out to be much lower than that of the presidential election. And just for the record, for the 2023 presidential election in Lagos State, only 18% of the registered voters turned out to vote. Now, why is that the case? A number of reasons. You have voter apathy, you have voter intimidation and suppression, you have the late arrival of INEC officials to the duty post, you have the fact that they've come with insufficient quantities of the electoral materials. You can name a number of reasons. And this has been a continuing trend. So in spite of the results, I would say generally for this election, INEC has performed very poorly. They have not reposed the trust we've held in them. And we should start to ask questions because they have seemingly maxed ulterior motives under the basket of incompetence. In 2011, we had 54% of the population turn out to vote, of the registered population, registered electoral lists come out to vote. In 2015, it dropped by 10% to 44%. In 2019, 35%. In 2023, 27%. So there is a underlying problem. It is very, very serious and it needs to be addressed. And coming out of the elections, we need to revisit our electoral law. It's high time INEC begins to answer questions about the conduct of elections it holds. Stop giving that burden to candidates or aspirants. Let INEC come out and defend whatever it does. 2, very radical proposition. Any political party or candidate established to have engaged in electoral violence, voter intimidation, voter suppression, if you're established by a court of law to have done that, you should be banned from the political process for a period of 10 years.
All right. Let us know what your thoughts are. The WhatsApp number is 080440981. Chibuzor, do you want to add?
Yes, I do. So what Mr. C has said a lot of what has happened over the weekend. And I think one of the questions I've always asked is, over time, INEC has distanced themselves from responsibilities of having to answer for these actions. They typically push it to, hey, the candidates should go to court and should find their redress in the tribunals. What we've seen in Lagos, and unfortunately, I would speak largely to Lagos because I know that that's where I had a lot of focus on. But I do know that we've heard reports from across the country of similar things or other things that have happened. Is that what we've seen is that typically we've had pockets of voter intimidation, but what we saw in this last election was actually a coordinated effort across board. So it typically was left to the party supporters. Obviously, the candidates have some deniability because they'll come out and say, hey, we went out to campaign, we pushed our message, we have nothing, no hands in this. But what we've seen is a lot of these party supporters who had made previous statements and set the platform or the groundwork for what happened over the weekend to happen, coordinated this movement, went across state, obviously in tandem with some INEC officials, because like Mr. C said, moving PUs to publicly accessible places from safer estate points is not done by the candidate on his own. It has to be done by the INEC official. So those questions need to be asked. Those questions need to be answered. Unfortunately, we would have a lot of rebuilding to do after these elections. We typically put our nationhood into a stress test every 4 years because of political power by politicians. And that's a major concern for me. Politicians have stressed the ethnic points to try and push their candidature and whatever they've tried to do here. So let's recover from this. Hopefully at some point we'll learn our lessons and try and make this better.
All right, let's look at a few messages coming through. Tayo says, after being encouraged to get PVCs, we witnessed large-scale voter suppression and intimidation. I saw sacrifices at my polling unit. No wonder people do not respect traditional practices. And let's go on to another message. This one is from Olatunde, and he says, the violence and intimidation witnessed on Saturday was very real, and it was on us as a people and not on INEC. We must look into the mirror first. Okay. And let's go on to the next story. We're going to come back to the messages that we have coming through. Don't forget the WhatsApp number is 0809 444 981. You can also tweet at smooth981. And of course, you can just post a comment underneath the live stream on YouTube as well. All right, so moving on to the next story. I'm just going to take a moment to pull that one up. Okay. This is from this day. Federal government cautioned against additional borrowing from the central bank. Now, the CEO of the CFG advisory has cautioned the federal government against further borrowing from the CBN. Now, this is coming following proposed steps where the government wants to take in refinancing of 23.7 trillion naira of the nation's total debt. Now, he's proposing, and that is Mr. Tilewa Adebajo, is proposing a resolution trust special purpose vehicle, which is backed by legislation within the Debt Management Office and acts as a framework against scrutinizing ways and means. Chibuzor?
So basically, the crux of this story is about the federal government's move to raise additional funds via the CBN. So Mr. Adebajo is obviously pointing out that within this framework or within this proposal that the government has put forward and which has been approved, that they have actually broken some statutes within the CBN's governing laws, and he's put forward an alternate proposal. While I'm going to step away from a lot of the financial things here, one of the things that comes out and pops out for me is where he talks in detail about the amount of money that the DMO is able to raise every month and how we are still going to have a shortfall, given what is currently on the table. His concerns obviously are that there is no clarity in how the CBN is going to pay for, how the federal government is going to be able to pay for this loan, and obviously the fact that that the precedent is going to be set in doing this, which can also be taken advantage of in the future. So one of the things that for me that comes out strongly is when our governments try to, obviously we're in the position where the federal government is trying to push a lot of infrastructural growth, a lot of projects, and it's not going to stop even with the new government. I do not expect the new government to walk away so far from what this current government is doing, which is trying to grow infrastructure, and it will push in the same direction. Unfortunately, we're not able to earn as much as we need to be able to do this because obviously we have the issues of crude oil theft, we have issues where we're not, and we've had this the cash issue that has basically slowed down the economy and increased our inflation rates. And the government is basically scampering for money to be able to deal with all these things. A large chunk of this money, unfortunately, is going to go to actually managing the government's expenses and not even into those projects. So it's another cause of concern. In trying to build our institutions, one of the things we need to do, and one of the things that the government is primarily responsible to, is to ensure that whatever requests, whatever demands they have should work within the remits of the law, and ensure that, because down the line, what it does is actually creates a precedent to strengthen those institutions. What the government should be careful, and Nigerians should be careful of supporting is our actions, even though they look populist or popular, that weak institutions. And I think Mr. Adebajo has just pointed that out in terms of this particular loan. He's put forward his own proposal on the table, which has to do with setting about SPV to actually drive the raising of these funds and how these funds will be paid back. So I think that's what the crux of the message is trying to pass out. And yes, even as Nigerians and every day, we are more conscious of the fact that we are having to take in more and more. And at some point, we would need to look strictly back at how do we repay these things, and before we start defaulting on any of these things. Luckily, this is an internal loan from the CBN, so we shouldn't have much of those concerns with this. But obviously the CBN also needs to keep functioning as it ought to. So that's a major thing. So we need to strengthen our institutions, and we shouldn't weaken them, even though there's a drive and need to do so.
Right. So
yes,
message.
I'm sorry. The last concern I have also is he's also pointed to how this was approved by the Senate House, the legislature. So that's one of the concerns. Legislation needs to move to the point where they actually scrutinize it. And I think Nigerians already pay the legislature, both the houses, enough funds to, even if the individuals themselves are not experts in this field, they are paid to actually run offices where they can get people who can advise them on these items. So we need to start getting value for our money for the decisions they take also.
All right, Ajayi says, good morning. Kudos to the president for signing the constitutional amendments that now have devolved some powers to the states. It's a great relief that states can now transmit and distribute electricity to their people. This would help boost the economy and bring tremendous employment opportunities to the teeming youth. And Fabian says, it's unfortunate that INEC does not have by-elections in areas where thugs disrupted the elections. This is another form of disenfranchisement. INEC should be made to account for how they spent the funds given to them, and erring officials should also be punished. Let's take a quick break. We'll continue the conversation on the other side. This is Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1.
8.1.
I don't tell you what I don't tell you.
No, it's the secret.
Oh my God.
It's National Day of Happiness. Be mindful, be grateful, be kind. All right, we're going on. Smooth 98.1. This is Freshly Pressed with Zibby and our analyst this morning, Mr. C and Chibuzor. We love to get your thoughts and opinions, so you can, of course, send them to us via WhatsApp. The number is 0809 444 0981, and you can also tweet at Smooth981. And catch the live stream as well on our YouTube. It's right to search for Smooth981, and you can actually even post a comment on there as well. So let's move on to the next story. And this one has to do with the population census. It's coming from The Guardian. Now, NPC, which is the National Population Commission, has stated that the 2023 population census will be conducted digitally. And according to the commission, it will be in line with the United Nations recommendations. The census manager, Dr. Inua Jalingo, who gave this hint at a one-day building workshop for journalists, spoke about how this process would work. He spoke about the adoptive and redeployment of digital technology that would engender confidence in the entire census process.
Okay, thank you, Zibby. Thank you, Zibby. So we note what the NPC has said, that the 2023 population census, which is scheduled to be conducted sometime in May, will be done properly and will be done digitally. Unfortunately, and very sadly, the story doesn't have a lot of detail on how this census will be conducted digitally. But if we take on board the fact that they've ordered software to the tune of $6.2 million, maybe there is an intention to do things properly. However, at this very point in time, there's some unease, some concern amongst some Nigerians that NPC will actually be able to carry out this job properly without any form of inducement or any form of interruptions or obstacles. And why do I say this? The last census exercise that was conducted was done in 2006, and there were contests about the figures that were declared for a lot of states, including Labour's. And very interestingly, the president-elect now, who was then governor of Lagos State, contested the figures that were given to Lagos State and said that Lagos State at that point in time should have had more people registered as living in Lagos than Kano. And as a result, the census tribunals that were set up, Lagos State filed a number of census petitions. Now, why must we get this right? If for every nation that intends to develop and develop properly, it has to have an idea of the number of people that live there. It is when you have an idea of the number of people that live there and the breakdown of the people into each age category, you will then have a better idea of the number of people who form the employable category of people in that country. You then have an idea of the sort of tax you should get, assuming everyone is working. You'll also then get an idea of the amount of resources you need to deploy to each sector of the country, to each part of the country. You then have an idea of how many children are in the country. And when you're planning for education, you then know how to plan properly. But sadly, in Nigeria, I'm not aware of any census whose results have not been contested, whose results have not been challenged on the grounds of politicization or being political, of pandering to certain interests. And it would be very interesting to see whether the NPC can do right what INEC has refused to do right, and which is carry out the duties to which have been entrusted to you, do them with a clear conscience, with a fear of responsibility and a duty of care to every Nigerian. Because at this material point in time, we can no longer afford to get things wrong. Nigeria is actually on the brink right now. And as at November or December last year, Nigeria was broke, because the money that we earned in November or December was about between 6.3 billion US dollars and 6.9 billion US dollars. Then what we spent on recurrent expenditure was also between 6.3 billion and 6.9 billion. What is the implication of that? We didn't save any money. Everything that came in went out. Forgetting that we have debt service payments and fuel subsidies. So how were they catered for? They were catered for by foreign borrowings. That cannot continue to happen. And one of the ways we're going to dig ourselves out of this seemingly bottomless pit we're in is for this 2023 census to be done properly.
Where I've got some messages coming through. Godwin says, despite the voter intimidation and all sorts, what gladdened my heart is the first woman elected governor in Adamawa State. That has not been confirmed by INEC, and I'm sure you're referring to Aisha Binani. That has not been confirmed by INEC. There are a lot of results on social media. It's always best to wait and get the official results from INEC. And this one is from Ifako, and Kule Bamboye from Ifako, and he says, the election was peaceful in my area and I voted. The stories, videos, and pictures in circulation regarding voter suppression and intimidation were discouraging. This was the style that had been used in previous elections to protect lives. We need the option of voting online in future elections for progress. And Michael says total votes cast for presidential election was about 1.3 million, roughly 200,000 more than governorship. The idea of voter suppression has little impact on the results, except you can establish that the numbers were falsified. Well, there were reports of this, and we can't discredit those stories. Yes, there were reports of voter intimidation in Lagos, in different parts of the country, and we can't discredit that it didn't happen when people are telling their stories. But again, that's up to the authorities to investigate. And let's move on to our next story. Again, the WhatsApp number is 0809 444 981. That is the WhatsApp number. And you can also tweet at Smooth981. And this one is coming from POM. Federal government sheds weight as Buhari ascends the power devolution bills. Now, the president has signed into law 16 bills seeking to amend various parts of the 1999 Constitution. And the devolution of power bill is just one of those that have been signed. Chibuzor?
Okay, so well, let's look at this as a silver lining in the clouds today. So the president has finally, or the federal government has finally been able to pass several bills that, and like most of these bills, actually devolve power from the executive down to the various states. And yeah, prominent among them is the ability of the states to be able to generate power, to generate their own power and able to distribute that power within the areas. Other things that come out in this list, because we're looking at several bills that were sent and assented, and to remind Nigerians, after these bills are typically passed to the federal houses of assembly, the lower and the upper houses, and once they are passed, they go to each of the state houses of assembly. Two-thirds of each of the state houses of assembly need to approve the amendments before they can be transmitted. They need to approve those amendments for them to be passed, right? So what we had is basically some of the states ascending to some of those laws and not ascending to several of them. I think the most prominent one that was not assented to by the states was actually the independent law that grants the local government independence, which is quite funny for me because that law basically allows the local government. We always talk about our democratic system, and the local government has been the most important one and the ones where people should pay more focus to in terms of the elections and ensure that bottom level that we have the right people. But in doing that, we need to strengthen the local government. And one of the ways that we had seen was that if the local governments would be granted some level of independence to be able to, to be able to get their own financing and do the work that we elect them to do. But what we've seen here is a pushback on the states and elements of the states, because most of what we had seen in previous regimes was that the state houses of assemblies were either run by the governors or dominated by the parties that the governments were running. And this basically reflects the state mindsets of most of those parties to most of those governors. We are still on the journey, and I hope that someday, somehow, we get to the point where we need to get to. But it's a lot of these laws that, for me, that was a very crucial law that was not passed. Other things that were passed here, and just to name a few, is one of the more interesting ones. Each of our local governments are named in the Constitution, and to make changes to those names, they have to pass those. So some in this package of 44 laws, we had some assents to changing names of local government. So, but those are things that we have, and I encourage people to look at this in detail to understand what has happened here. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to read a final message because we are out of time. This one says, my personal opinion is that this period is not right for the census. What is worth doing is worth doing well. People are still struggling to come to terms with the elections. Let's not have another fiasco. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your messages. And of course, thanks to my analysts, Mr. C and Chibuzor, for joining us this morning. Do stay with us. There's a lot more to come on a Smooth Breakfast.